I think that's way above my pay grade to try to figure out why there is so much paranoia. I think people are online a lot, obviously a lot more now. And because of what they see, I think causes them to be overprotective, perhaps, of their own, how their own image is going to be used. So I think that's a big part of it.
I want to start right off by saying, actually, by asking you, who is Don Hudson?
Who is Don Hudson? Well, I was born in 1950 in Detroit, Michigan. So I'm the quintessential baby boomer, if you will. Um, and I guess I'll describe my relationship to photography. So growing up in the 1950s in a small town about 30 miles west of Detroit, I started my relationship with photography as a subject. It on holidays, birthdays, vacations, things like that, I was the one that was being photographed to mark the occasions. So
Yes.
that's for starters. And then when I became in my tween years in 1960, early 1960s, I wanted to have a camera. And I got my first camera, a Kodak Instamatic, and I became the person taking photographs on the family vacation, which I still have some of those uh, films too. So it's kind of cool. When I got to high school in the late 60s, I befriended a couple of people who were photographers for the yearbook. And the cool thing about them is that they both had dark rooms in their parents' basements and started spending some time in their dark rooms. And I wanted a dark room, and my mom was, gracious enough to allow me to use her laundry room as a dark room. And I blacked out the windows and set up my enlarger and trays on top of her washer and dryer. And so I got really into the um, processes of photography. Not so much, I wasn't taking a lot of pictures, but I just enjoyed doing crazy different things in the darkroom. Um, when I left high school in 1969, I went to university, really didn't know what I wanted to do, but the Vietnam War was raging at that time. So going to college at that time when I went was a deferment from the draft. There was a draft going on. Well, after I think it was the second year at college, they instituted the lottery draft. There was no student deferments or exemptions. So I got drafted, and I drew a low number, so I knew I was going to get drafted, and sure enough, I did. Went down for my physical and was rejected because I had a hernia. So uh, that was kind of
Lucky.
a big turning point in my life because I was contemplating, if I was to go to Vietnam, I mean, my life would be really changed. So, but having the physical deferment, then I decided that what I really wanted to do, I wanted to do something that I love, and I loved photography. So I quit the university, put together a little portfolio, applied for art school in Detroit, and got accepted in the fall of 1972. And it was there that first of all, I fell in it with a lot of like-minded people, and which I didn't really, know too much before I got to art school, and also honed my technical skills in the darkroom and exposure and so forth. We learned the zone system. And the other thing that was really important for me was to study the history of photography and the changes that took place over time. I took a documentary photography class, and that turned me on to the Farm Security Administration photographers like uh, Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, Russell Lee, people like that. And I just fell in love with that stuff. And then, progressing from that was people like Robert Frank, Gary Winogrand, Lee Friedlander, the people that kind of took that straight from the camera type of documentary photography and kind of personalized it. And that really turned me on. So after about 2 years at art school, I realized that I was not going to make my living at photography. And that's one of the tracks that you would be on in school, or academia life, like teaching photography. And I didn't really want to do that either. I wanted to do my personal work. I wanted to do what Robert Frank did and what Gary Winogrand was doing and people like that. So I left school and got a day job, got a regular job in the offset printing business, and then pursued my personal work from that point on. And I guess the work in the book that's coming out covers that period of the 1970s and early 80s, probably the my response, I guess you'd call it, to what the generation just preceding me, the Gary Winogrands and Lee Friedlanders, were doing and coming out with their books at that time. So my work was kind of a response to that. Anything else you want to know?
To that guy, yeah, actually, I do. There is something else I want to know. Apart from big inspirations like Gary Winogrand, Dorothea Lange, and other things, I feel like human beings get always influenced by their own backgrounds, where they live, what they've been going through. Growing up in the Midwest, which is a particular part of America as well. It's on the classic New York, LA, or those kind of cities. Do you think growing up in the Midwest has changed or affected or influenced your photographic vision, if it did?
Yes, it has. And like you said, the stuff that I was responding to was mainly the people working in New York City, for example, Gary Winogrand, people like that.
Yeah.
We didn't, where I was living and working, we didn't have the teeming city. It was more of a rural, more small town kind of a life. And so I kind of like gravitated toward that. That's where I lived. I mean, so I gravitated towards the type of events that took place in my neck of the woods, so to speak. So festivals, parades, things like that. The cultural of my local cultural events and topologies is what I gravitated to. I was trying to work that scene kind of like the New York street photographers were working their scene. So yeah, it's where I lived. It's where what I experienced. So that's what I was photographing.
And do you remember the very first photograph you took? Was it a
Wow.
disaster? Or was
Well,
it, I mean, something that you enjoyed?
well, the very first photograph I took was way back when I was like probably 12 years old with my Instamatic we had a trip to Florida that I remember that I'd taken pictures. But as far as like um, during when I was at school in Detroit, 70 fall of 72 to the spring of 74 is where I was when I was there. In 1973, I lived in the city proper, did a lot of photographing there. And I think, the photographs that I remember taking that I submitted as a portfolio, I remember those well. I still have them, from roughly 1969 to 1970, 71. There is perhaps the earliest photograph that may be in the book is a photograph I took at a Vietnam War protest in the city of Detroit in 1969. That's probably my favorite early photograph that I made. And another one from 1972 is this was before I left. I think it was actually before I started it at school. It was in the spring of 1972 on a trip that I made at spring break to Florida. And there's a picture, we were out on a highway, there's a single highway that goes out to the Florida Keys. And there was something happening and totally stopped traffic. And I got out and made a photograph down this whole line of cars with some people standing by their cars. That's another early photograph that I remember that I like a lot. So that's two of them.
So we can move maybe to a little bit more of your style and approach.
Yeah. You described parades and cultural events are as some of the things that have drawn your attention. So is there anything that today, just as yesterday, catches your attention the most?
I mean,
as a
what I'm shooting
photographer?
today, what I'm shooting these days? Same thing, actually. Same thing. I guess I'm even more of a focus on the small towns. We have a family cottage that's up in northern Michigan that we could spend, from spring to fall, probably half the time there as opposed to my main house. And what I do up there is it's really rural, more rural than where I live here. And what fascinates me there are the people that come out for their cultural events, their little festivals, their parades and things like that. So I'm still photographing that stuff, just probably even more focused on the rural aspect. It's interesting to me that the people, when they come out to these events, what they're wearing, they're often are advertising their self through what they're wearing, in terms of their T-shirts or different things like that. So, and oftentimes these are family events, so I'm shooting a wide range of ages and folks. So that kind of stuff, that kind of social energy is really still what attracts me today. And then, balanced out with some more deliberative, like cultural topography type work, like the new topographics type of style of work. That always interests me too, like just noticing how the expressions in our culture, and especially in the rural culture.
But do you specifically identify as a street photographer, or do labels not matter to you?
I would say I don't think of myself as street photography. And the interesting thing is, back in the 70s, the people that I, were my like-minded photography friends, we never used that term, even though I guess that we were, doing it. I don't remember using that term that much. It's become such a loaded term now, it seems like. So, I can't say that I'm a street photography. I mean, some of the stuff I do, I guess, is lumped into street photography, but
It would
I
be
don't
more.
really use that term.
Yeah.
I don't
we
really
could
use
look-
that term.
Okay.
Because I'm just jumping in for a second because yesterday I don't know if you know, but yesterday I was talking to Mark Aller-Powell. He's also from Detroit, and we were actually talking about
He's a
this
friend of mine, yeah.
labeling. Yeah, he told me so. And we were actually talking about labels in that sense. And he was saying kind of the same thing, like it doesn't matter to have a definition, it matters more the vision of the photographer itself. So it doesn't need to be classified necessarily as a
Right.
street photographer or a documentary photographer in that sense. It doesn't really change much in the artistic side of it. Just wanted to interject.
Yeah,
A little bit.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why the question is there, because we want to know whether the definition matters within your artistic approach. And speaking of approach, I would like to know more about the approach you have when you're looking for a nearly perfect shot.
Well, I would say that, back to the labels, I guess, I would call myself a straight from the camera photographer. In other words, my own personal rules are that I respect how the camera can describe the world, for one thing. And so, and I respect the transformative power of a photograph. So it means I don't crop. So what I look for but I look to cram the frame as much as I can to try to make all aspects of the frame interesting, right from edge to edge. So, as far as what intrigues me, like you said before, the cultural references and the kind of somewhat loaded, I guess, a situation that can be an interesting alternative fact, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to say what, I think in the act of shooting, I'm not really that, I'm just going for a flow of energy, I guess, and hoping that the camera can reveal something to me that is interesting and yeah, I guess that's the way I'd put it. Not very eloquently, but
Yeah, I think it's great.
I think that's an interesting answer. And I would like to know, how do you balance chaos and control when planning your shoots, since you're more of a gut instinct kind of photographer?
I don't really plan, I don't think. I just try to inject myself into a situation. And I would say that I'm not a sneaky photographer. I'm not like, looking away and point the camera somewhere. It's important for me to look through the viewfinder and to try to frame up something and compose it interestingly. Um, so, I don't, it's hard, if that's considered planning, I mean, looking through the viewfinder, and that's about as far as the planning goes. Because
That's fair.
most of the stuff that, the cultural events, the street work, if you will, it's not something you can plan. You're just injecting yourself into the energy and with your camera and doing the best you can. And you miss a lot, that's true. But
It happens to miss a lot, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I want to connect to what you were saying with your relationship. You've said multiple times, and also before, that you have the relationship you have with you, yourself, the camera, and the setting. It's kind of like a three-side way of like three-side collaboration or relationship in that sense. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Can you
well,
tell me what you mean by
yeah,
that?
I think it definitely is a collaboration. I mean, the camera is an interesting tool to me, and what
Yeah.
it can do to just a facet of space and time. And so I've always tried to understand how photographs work, and that kind of attention attention that is between the form and the content.
Mm.
In other words, the form, how the photograph looks, and the content would be some aspect of maybe not really a story, but something that you can people can read into it, and they can read into in different ways. So I think the most successful photograph is one that has that tension between the two. Uh,
Mm.
so I think I've lost the train of thought.
No, yeah, this three-sided
Yeah,
collaboration
it's a
relationship
collaboration. Definitely,
with the
that's the way I've always thought of my relationship to the camera, is a collaboration. The camera, the camera has taught me things too about the way photographs turn out and what happens, and uh, I'm open to that. That's in my head all the time when I'm photographing is, how is the camera going to transform this scene? So I respect how it does that. And
Yeah,
I like to align myself with how that does that when I go about shooting.
it's totally fair and it makes so much sense. Also, I feel like this relationship reflects in your photograph, particularly because they are very layered and the different elements within the
Hmm.
photograph really are cohesive and talk to each other in that sense. And in relation to this, I want to ask you if this is something that you are particularly aware when you shoot, or is it more, as also Marilo was saying before, a gut feeling? How does it work for you? How does this dynamic kind of influence the way you shoot?
Well, I think it is kind of both, actually. I think after when you do this kind of thing for a while, uh, you can trust your instincts and your gut, for one thing, and I trust. I'm interested in how the camera is going to resolve this, and I don't know necessarily, obviously, until sometime later when I look at what I shot. But
Sure.
so it starts out definitely as a trust with how the camera can see things, and uh, and hopefully I by trusting it, I can get something that is worth looking at, worth seeing.
Fair enough. You mentioned before that you did 2 years of university in photography class and courses, and I bet you've learned quite a lot of things as well, especially in terms maybe of rules or like specifics that we need to follow when we shoot. But do you follow rules? And if you don't, which rules do you usually like to break?
They're personal rules, I guess. One rule is I want my photographs to have detail in as much as possible in the shadows and highlights, and a very open kind of a look. I'm not never been like a high contrast photographer or that kind of thing, or
Yeah.
so that starts with that. It's like kind of a respect I have for the um, people that made the films and made the cameras, and they wanted lenses and films that could reproduce as much of the real world as possible, even though it's in black and white, which is not, but so yeah, it starts with a respect for that and a respect for the camera, which for me translates into not cropping. I'm going to try to be one with the camera and see how it sees, so to speak. I'll choose when to trip the shutter, but I want to respect how the camera sees things. So it's full frame and as much detail as I can get. So those are my rules.
Yeah, love those. No, absolutely. And you have talked about your relationship with photography as a kind of obsession. So you've always been obsessed with photography.
Mhm.
Has it always been a driving force, or does it sometimes hinder your creative progress because sometimes one gets caught up in perfectionism and
Sure,
other such tricks of the mind?
sure. No, I'd say over the 50 plus years I've been doing it, it's been up and down. There's been definitely fallow periods where forces from the outside, whether it be my job, family, whatever, you know, um, constricts my time with the camera. So yeah, it's happened. It's like I say, the '70s and early '80s was a very strong period for me photographically. But then, in the later '80s, '90s, I was kind of not in a you know not doing it that much. Other
Mm,
things took
yeah,
precedent, and
which is
and
fair.
but then in the new century, our kids are growing up and on their own. You know, we I've had more time, so I've had a resurgence, and I also got very much interested in color work because with the advent of digital, I could do color work a lot less expensively. So, so yeah, that's that, and that's what I do now is
What do
so.
your children think about you being a photographer? What's their opinion about it? I wanted to ask this already beforehand because you're such a very iconic photographer as well, at least in the field. You're very well known. What do your kids think about it? If it matters, of course, it doesn't matter. I bet you're always their dad, but just curious to know.
I don't know either, really, to be honest with you. They don't really they don't really,
Say much.
worship me for my photography or
No,
anything. So,
sure.
and they I mean, when they were younger and early, in the like early 80s, I was photographing them a lot, and I think that was a I now I come up with these photographs sometimes that they have not seen, and I think they're very interested, but I don't think they don't think of me as like a well-known photographer or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a curiosity
We
of
get
Just
mine.
dad.
Just dad. Love it.
Yeah.
It's fair.
You mentioned that you don't crop, but what's your go-to editing routine?
My go-to what?
Editing routine.
Uh, well, back in the last century in the film days, I would probably wait until I had, uh, you know, because you'd have to mix up chemistry, right? So you could process, X number of rolls, but you didn't want to just process a couple rolls at a time and then have the chemistry go bad. So usually I'd wait till I had a bunch of 20 rolls or something, and then start processing them and go through make contact sheets. Everything's on a contact sheet, and then just looking at that and kind of as an aside, interesting to me was when I started revisiting these archives, like in this century. It's interesting to look at these old contact sheets and see markings that I had on them from the time before about something that interested me. And then now looking at them like 40, 50 years later, different things are interesting to me. But yeah, then I would do that, and then I would make work prints, and then eventually, make final prints. Not too many, back in those days, it was, like I said, you had chemistry to deal with and all that. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of surviving vintage prints.
Oh,
I have some from a couple of shows that I was in back in the late 70s, but don't have too much. And so now it's kind of a similar thing. I mean, I'll photograph and fill up a card, say, a SD card, and then sometime later I'll upload them to the computer and look at them. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, certainly it does. And since you have lived through many eras of photography, basically, um, is there a photographer other than Gary Winogrand who's like one of your greatest inspirations?
Hmm.
Is there any other photographer that has a different style than yours, but you still deeply admire?
Well, you mean from then or from now? Because it's
Mm.
sometimes. Well, I'd say when I was left school in 1974, I became friends with some Detroit area photographers, and I would say at that time we were influencing each other. So the people that are still friends of mine to this day uh, influenced me back then. Um, at that time, they were probably the only people that ever saw any stuff that I did too. I mean, I had a couple of shows, but it was just basically the same handful of people that would show up for these, to the openings. So I was influenced by my immediate peers a lot. Um, they were doing different styles. I mean, one would be more Winogrand style, one would be more of the new topographics type stuff. So that that new topographics movement did influence me too. Matter of fact, I have an original copy of the original catalog,
Oh,
and yeah. So and color work, William Eggleston influenced me back then. Even though I wasn't shooting color, it's still the way he approached things was influence on me. So, and nowadays, I'm influenced by things I see on Instagram and other photographers that I become friends with, just this century. In fact, one is, Mark Powell. I guess you could say he's doing maybe a similar style to me. The other one is Simon Kossoff, who's a good friend of mine. We've done his book. Matter of fact, he just texted me just before we were coming on air here and wanted to know how it was going. So,
Oh, yeah.
cool.
That's amazing.
so yeah, and in fact, I try to make it a point. I do a lot more traveling now too. So I do, a lot of photography during my travels around the country on road trips and whatnot. And so Simon is somebody that I see on a regular basis, even though he lives in Arkansas now. But we've connected in real life quite a bit over the last probably since about 2009. So yeah, people like I see a lot of interesting stuff on Instagram too that's totally different than what I do. I don't know that I incorporate it that much into my practice, but I still find it very interesting.
That's fair. Also because one tends to be inevitably inspired by other people's art. And speaking of which, have you ever borrowed from other art forms like music, like cinema, even something that doesn't specifically have to do with imagery, even poetry, one could say?
Well, I don't know that it's influenced the way I work in photography, but music has always been very important to me. As a matter of fact, that's oftentimes how I bond with other photographers is because through music. So yeah, music is very important to me, and I don't know how it influences me that much, but I mean, as far as photography goes, but it definitely influences my life.
absolutely. And in what ways?
Well, I'm a very into a big variety of music, and everything, blues, jazz, funk, soul music is a big thing. I grew up, growing up in the Detroit area, Motown was very important growing up. So I'm not sure how it influences me, but I guess I'm very open-minded. So I suppose regarding music and so I guess that keeps me open to other things that I see.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair.
Absolutely. And, confrontation leads to getting or giving advice. What's the best advice you've gotten and the worst advice you've gotten in photography?
Best advice I've gotten. Well, to keep shooting. I think that's some regret sometimes I have is even though I did shoot a lot in the 70s and early 80s, I wish I had shot more. And I think that that's the best advice I've been given, and that's probably the best advice I would give to anybody too, is just go out and work.
Yeah.
The worst advice, well, I think, I don't know, if I get something that is, that I don't agree with, I just don't pay it any attention really. So just let it go,
That's fair.
So I don't know that anybody's giving me bad advice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Better to forget those.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one last thing about this topic. Okay, well, what was that? Okay. How did you end up developing, what helped you developing your unique photography voice, your unique voice as as a photographer?
Uh, honestly, I'm not sure how unique it is, but I think uh, I'm photographing what I encounter. All I can say about it. I don't know how unique it is. I think it's a lot of people do the straight from the camera type of style, if you will. It's a documentary style. I don't know. It's a personal documentary, but so it's not. I don't really, never really gone out to try to document something in a I don't know, what you would think of as a straight documentary type photographer. I'm just documenting my own life. So I guess that's unique because it's my own life.
And
Um,
your personal point
Yeah.
of view as well,
yeah,
I
my
think.
personal,
For
yep.
me, yeah, I feel like because sometimes there is this very big debate of not copying each other. I mean, of not copying big influence photographers. Like it could be Gary Winogrand, or it could
Hmm.
be Lee Friedlander, or it could be Magnum photographers as well. But I feel like a photographer always will bring his own upbringing, his own vision, so it's never going to be the
Sure.
same.
Hmm.
And related to this, your photographs has been compared to those of Winogrand's. What do you
Hmm.
think about it, and how do you feel about this comparison? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's not really fair in a way? How do you what do you think?
Well, it's probably, first of all, he was a big influence on me, and no doubt about it. And I guess it's only natural for somebody that becomes familiar with a certain style or certain way of photographing, and you see something similar. It's natural, I guess, to say, because you're familiar with Winogrand, for example, that somebody looks like they're doing Winogrand type stuff. Um, I don't know. I guess that's only natural. I don't know that I don't worry about it. I mean, I admit that he was an influencer on me. So,
Yeah.
you know, uh, like I say, I don't worry if somebody says, "Oh, you shoot like Wintergrand." Well, I guess, but
I guess it's a compliment, in a
it's a
way, like
compliment. Yeah, sure.
as well. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're losing yourself into his own way of
Right,
approaching photographs. The opposite to me. But, there is
right.
this very big debate in the photography community
Well,
where you need to
yeah.
very much be straight to
Hmm.
your own in a sense. So,
You know, yeah, I did. In 1977, my good friend moved down to Texas and in Austin and was taking Winogrand's class. And when we went down to visit him, I got to meet Gary. And as a matter of fact, one of the things what I did when I was down there is go to San Marcos, Aquawiener Springs, which
mm,
Winogrand shot in 1964. The Ralph the Swimming Pig is one of his
oh,
photographs from that time. And so I had to go down there and pay homage to Winogrand by photographing Ralph.
I love that. That's pretty cool.
So,
That's pretty
but
cool.
you might say I copied Winogrand, but I don't. That was just an homage to him, and uh, I don't really try to copy specific shots or whatever. But anyway,
Yeah, that's cool. That's really
I
nice.
was photographing rodeos before I saw Winogrand's rodeo pictures. So,
Exactly. That's exactly my point from before. I think that's a very good way of putting it. I wanted to move on a little bit and ask you about supporting each other within the field of photography.
mhm,
I feel like photographers should always confront it with each other and develop new ideas, because that's what makes the community, stronger in a way. What do you think about supporting fellows photographer? How do you have you experienced this, and what do you think about it?
Well, I support him a lot. You should see my photo book library. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
anytime that, friends of mine come out with a book and everything, I'm supporting it. I'm buying a copy. Um, so I do that for sure, quite a bit. In fact,
yeah.
I gotta probably gonna have to get some more bookshelves. So I got them piled, that my bookshelves are stuffed, and I got piles of the books around. In fact, this camera is propped up
Yes.
on a big big pile of photo books.
Maybe at the end of the call, we can check this out. Maybe we could record your own setting and see how that
Sure.
looks.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to change topics just a little bit so we
Sure.
can go into the meaning of photography for you. So, what's your raison d'être as a photographer?
What was it? What?
Your motivation, what drew you to photography?
I don't really know. I am a classic introvert for one thing. So, uh, you know, and so photography fits my style in that sense. And even when going out to shoot at even high social energy events, which is expending a lot of energy, but then that's balanced with coming back and being solitary and back in the day in the dark room or in, the computer looking at my photographs and seeing what I shot. So, um, it's something that suits me for sure. My personality, I guess, for one thing. But I think that the one of the original, maybe subconscious motivations is when I was that, subject matter of a photograph as a kid. Somehow, subconsciously, it did kind of enter my mind that somebody with a camera had power over people in a way, because you had, as a subject, you had a position to maintain or an orientation to the sun or whatever it was, or a group. And I guess that kind of intrigued me, um, the power that the camera has. And, I kind of wanted to I like wielding that power a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
fair.
Oh, that's a very interesting take. Anything else you would like to add about this?
well, as far as, I would just say that my motivation has gone up and down over the, 50 years. So, uh, but it still comes back to just it's a joy. I mean, the act of photography, no matter if I get anything that's, quote, good or not, just the act of photography is enjoyable to me. To being out in that social energy of, parades and whatnot that I do, or even just driving around and seeing something that interests me visually. It's a pleasure. Um, so I just look at photography as a pleasurable thing to do, engage in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You actually answered my next question. So my other next question was, what's the one shot that changed everything for you? What was your game changer in photography?
Hmm. Well, I referred to that shot that I took on a vacation in Florida in the Florida Keys on that highway. That um, that was a very early photograph that really spoke to me somehow. Uh, so I would have to say that as far as my own work.
That's
Um,
fair. Okay, I think we can go on like the more nerdy stuff. So I can pass the baton
Yes,
to you.
absolutely. So then I want to go back a little bit before you mention the advent of color in that way as well, in that sense as well. And I feel like with the advent of color also it comes the advent of digital. So it was around 2005 more or less that you started to switch, if we can say switch, to digital photography. And I wanted to ask you, how did this transition, if it did, change your photographic approach?
Yes, it did. And that's right around the time we had moved into our current house then in actually in '03, and eventually, so about '05, I decided that I was not going to build another darkroom. And with the advent of digital, and I had always wanted to shoot in color more, and could never really afford it back in the day. So at that point, I sold my darkroom equipment and my film cameras and jumped both feet into digital. And, at first, the early digital cameras were not that great. but what I started doing was I started doing work on a tripod too, more deliberative stuff at first when I first got into the digital, and just driving around and looking at scenes, composing and working very deliberately on a tripod. But that graduated as I cameras got a little bit better. I basically now do kind of the same thing I did with black and white film, but it's just color digital. Uh,
Is there anything you missed at that time from the analog photography that in digital you didn't have, or you didn't, or it was impossible to have
I mean, and did I miss
when you were
film
shooting?
photography?
Yeah, exactly. When you switched, was there
Sometimes, but
something?
no, not really. I just it was time to first of all, I think that, well, even going back to the the early '70s, it was roll film, right? It was 35 millimeter film, but there were people then doing work with like glass plates and coating their own stuff and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I thought, well, you know, roll film is where it's at. That's the contemporary method of photography, and I thought it was kind of. I mean, it's beautiful. It's all processes are cool. They have their cool things, but I
Yeah,
thought
that's for sure.
it was something. It was from the past, and kind of now. Even though I really appreciate film photography and the people that do it, I just think digital is our age right now, and so that's the, that's what I want to shoot.
Yeah.
uh,
In fact, I wanted to ask if you found any advantages more in the digital rather than the analog, but you kind of answered me. I don't know if you want to add something else to this, but otherwise,
well, I think that is going back to my obsession, I guess, with detail and so forth. I think the modern digital cameras gives you a lot of detail, and through software, obviously you can, you know, and I'm not that great at it. I mean, I use Lightroom, and the reason for Lightroom is that it's probably closer to the old darkroom optical chemical kind of way of looking, processing your stuff. But there's you can get more detail in digital, and I like that. I mean, there are those that, and I think that what's really interesting to me is that a lot of young people that grew up in the digital age like to shoot film, and I think
yeah.
that's just probably their response to having grown up in this digital age, and it's kind of like they're into the kind of the throwback of the old analog days. Whereas with me, it's like, okay, I did all that stuff and it was great, but now I want to be,
And
now it's the digital age, so I'm shooting
that's
digital.
Yeah, it's also much cheaper, no?
It
But
is,
yeah,
especially if you're going to shoot color.
yeah,
it's gonna be a lot cheaper.
no,
Uh,
absolutely. Damn. Yeah, I guess it's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to add something.
I would like to go a little bit into the book, actually. I think it's
okay.
time to talk about Can I Get a Witness?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. So we have said a couple very interesting things about the title. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the choice of that particular song and what it means to you?
Yeah, it's as I said, music is a very important part of my life. It always has been, and I think growing up in the Detroit area in Motown, that's the reference for in the title. So that was kind of important. It was an important connection, I guess, to music and to Detroit. Uh,
Absolutely.
and I think also, I guess you can look at my photographs as a witness to the social goings on of that period of the period of the book, the 70s and early 80s. So I think that title plays into that, being a witness.
Yeah. Could you elaborate a bit more on what it means to be a witness to you?
Hmm. Well, a witness to somebody who somebody who, I guess somebody who pays attention to what's going on in the culture, and or at least an aspect of the culture that I'm focusing on. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know, it just rings true to me.
Oh, that's an awesome definition, actually. I really, really like it. And how has the world changed through your lens? Basically, you've been photographing
Hmm.
decades, very important decades for America, very important places in America. So places that have undergone so much change, so much unrest. So how has the world changed through your lens?
Well, people have changed that are in front of it. Just on the surface, the surfaces have changed. The way people dress. Obviously now everybody's plugged in, so to speak. And back then, you didn't, something is, navigation. I mean, back in the days, you didn't know where the hell you were going half the time, and the only way to figure it out was to stop and ask somebody, and actually talk to them. Um, so you don't have to do that nowadays. I think there's, in a lot of ways, people are much more remote from each other. Um, that's the, I it was way, and in terms of access to places, there's much more paranoia nowadays than there was 50 years ago. Even though that was a turbulent time too, um,
Yeah.
but it it just seemed more, you were just experiencing what was in front of you. You didn't have a device that could go around the world and communicate with somebody or look at something, whatever. It's just what was in front of you, and that's really changed, obviously. Now, we live half our life in the virtual world, it seems, to greater or lesser extent for different people. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's really different.
Yeah,
It is.
But
absolutely.
I think one of the big things is that nowadays, because people aren't as used to talking to one another face to face, there's more paranoia, and because you have access to a lot of weird information about things, which is often not true, uh, that sets up, you know, weird kind of reactions, you know. I mean, you know, I've noticed that. I mean, in photographing, I mean, people
Yeah.
are very suspicious a lot of times, even though everybody's got a camera on their phone. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or giving their data to any kind of
mhm,
platforms, like it could be
right.
Instagram, for mentioning once.
Hmm.
I don't know. I feel like no matter how close we can get
Yeah.
with internet and with connections, we're much further away from each other,
Yeah.
which is so strange as well. You know, also the access maybe to places
Hmm.
was different once.
Yeah.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
this was what we were mentioning the other time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm trying to understand also.
Yeah, no, I think there's a design in why we're being made to be isolated to one another, even if we are being made to be constantly accessible. But that's kind of a conspiracy theory kind of thing that we'll stay for
Sure.
another time. Let's hold
That's a
on.
whole other discussion, right?
Yeah.
Yes, love that.
Let's hold on to this thought because we're gonna come back to it later. There's actually a few things we'll be asking about paranoia, consent, and
Exactly.
everything else. So before I forget, I would like to ask you just one thing, like your survival guide for shooting in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Survival guide. Well, that's one reason why I like photographing up in the rural areas of northern Michigan, for one thing, the small towns. I think there's, uh, despite what you may hear about, you know, people in the rural America, often face to face, they're, you know, guileless. I mean, I haven't, you know, no issues with, you know, folks in small town America. And I like it, you know, it's more so than, you know, in the, you know, the wealthy areas and in the cities, I think. Uh, like I say, there's surveillance cameras everywhere in a lot of places, especially in the cities and that. And it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes, you know.
Nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Okay, why
But
so?
you know, like you know, back in 1980 when the Republicans came to Detroit for their convention, I went out to an event that had Ronald Reagan at it, I could get within, I could swing my camera and hit him. You know, I don't think you can do that today with the
No,
current, you know, public figure. So a lot has changed, yes.
a lot has changed
And
for
one
sure.
reason why when I do a lot more traveling now, and when I travel, I make it a point to try to hook up in real life with people that I've met on Instagram and you know, social networks, uh, and that's been a very positive thing experience to meet with people in face to face in real life.
Speaking of public and online and offline spaces, most of the photos in Can I Get a Witness were shown after 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And it was not shown until 2009. How
Mm.
was to have them or see them online? What was the reaction you had from the public? How did you feel as well to showcase your photos and get such a huge get back, like, I mean, such a huge reaction to your photograph? How was it like?
It felt great. You know, I mean, because more people have seen that work, you know, then than had back in the day. I mean, like I say, I did have some public exhibitions and was involved in, but it was just a similar, you know, same handful of people that would show up. So having the work exposed, you know, on social media or you know in public is it's felt great. In
And
fact,
what
I've
was,
got, you know, trying to convince a really good friend of mine to put more of his work out there. You know, that I've known since those days, 1974. He has some great work, and I don't know why he doesn't want to publicly show it too much. But anyway, I've, you know, enjoyed the response and the feedback I've gotten for sure. Made a lot of new friends and like I say, those are the friends that I try to make it a point to visit when I'm out and about.
Exactly. And what was the process of rediscovery to you? How did you feel in getting all this old
Well, I mean,
archive?
well, what happened, in 2008, I lost my job in that Great Recession, and in early 2009, when I had more time, so I really that's when I was doing the work, had gotten a digital camera and was doing a lot of work there, and it started. So I can't remember who it was that told me about Flickr.
Hmm.
But I joined Flickr and started posting some stuff, and then I bought a scanner and started scanning some of the old stuff and putting it on there, and that's when I got the reaction. Um, and I think there was people that were in the photographic community, online photographic community through Flickr, and that it was kind of a somewhat of a new thing for somebody to post old, that had been doing photography in the previous century. Uh, it was kind of a novelty when I first started doing anything. I don't think that many people were, first of all, probably not that many photographers that were active in the 70s were on social media, I don't think.
Mm.
It was mostly like, you know, contemporary people, whatever. So I think that there was kind of a novelty to it and a kind of oh, wow, this guy was shooting this stuff that way back then. And,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed the reaction.
Yeah. Who wouldn't know?
Yeah.
In that sense. To just wrap up this part, this section on Can I Get a Witness, I wanted to ask you if you could sum up the book in one picture, what would it be?
Hmm. Well, I'd say probably one of my favorite pictures is the couple by the car outside the cafe, um, both from a form standpoint. I like the picture within a picture framing,
Mm-hmm.
the uh, you've got in the lower corner you have the place setting on the table, and then it goes out into the distant and the horizon. So there's a lot of depth to it. And then the notion of what's going on with the couple, I think offers some kind of a open-ended narrative as to the content or what's going on. So I'd say that photograph sums up a lot of my, what I think is a good photograph.
Yeah, it definitely does. I would have said something similar as well, but I guess that one really portrays, it gives an eye on your vision of it. So thank you for sharing it. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I would like to circle back to the discussion on consent and privacy because I feel there's a whole discussion to be had about it. And as we mentioned at the time, we had this chat about people being more afraid of being photographed nowadays. And there's a few factors that may play a role into this fear. Today, as you mentioned, it's almost harder to go out and about and photograph in the streets because people are afraid. How much does fear play a role into it, and how much does insecurity and unattainable aesthetic standards and how much hypersurveillance play all these factors, how much do they play a role into the increasing difficulty of getting good photographs, good shots in the streets?
Mm. Well, yeah, I don't know. Well, I don't. I think that's way above my pay grade to try to figure out why there is so much paranoia. I think there's, people are online a lot, obviously a lot more now, and they are they because of what they see, I think causes them to be overprotective, perhaps, of their own how their own image is going to be used, and so I think that's a big part of it. It's interesting that photographing these the rural towns in northern Michigan, and I have to say I'm not I'm not a sneaky photographer. I mean it's very aware when I'm in these social energies social landscape type positions that I've got a camera and I'm photographing people, and I think I'm very open about it. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm from the newspaper. They're gonna be in the newspaper. They actually joy, joy about that. I mean, but then you do get because I'm not sneaky and because people are aware that I have a camera, I do have to put up with the kind of performative things from people, which don't really make a good photograph. If you want to try to be candid and catch kind of a revealing, candid moment or something like that. You're not, if people are goofing off for you, it's, okay, I'll take their photograph. It's digital, so I can delete it, So, but, I think that you just I try to be as open as I can with people and transparent so I think that helps, but there are people that are not going to accept anything. They think you're invading their privacy or whatever. And every once in a while, something negative happens, a negative interaction, but, that's our life nowadays. I mean, I guess you have to deal with that, but if you're a photographer, I mean, you can be the hip shooting kind of person, not looking at the viewfinder, just kind of surreptitiously taking your shots. And actually, sometimes that's an interesting way to go about it. So, I mean, there are people that do that, and then there are people that are very in your face, and I don't know how they get away with it, so to speak. I don't know if people that are using flash on the street. I use flash. I mean, on the street too. But the real in your face kind of stuff, I don't do that kind of stuff. It's more of a respectable distance, I guess you'd say. But
keeping the bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. Just another little thing about this, and then I swear I'll leave you alone on the topic. You also mentioned that it's now harder to get into events with a camera.
Mm-hmm.
So you used to go to sports festival and just be out and about, but nowadays you have to sign like 40 documents to even get one shot that from a specific angle. You can't even, go around the venues. So,
especially in America, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How has it made your creative process a bit slower, a bit harder? So what was the impact on your creative flow?
Well, I mean, I have gone into certain situations and maybe in certain places that, and I've got that negative reaction, and okay, I pack it up and go. I mean, it's like I don't, and again, that's another reason why I enjoy photographing at the small rural towns, because they don't seem to have that kind of an attitude as much. So I guess that's how it's affected me. I've just, I push aside the negativity and go do something positive, or at least that is people are fine with. Like I say, I'm not specifically out documenting one particular thing necessarily, and therefore have to make, contacts, ahead of time and permissions and all that kind of stuff. I just photograph candidly, I mean, and openly. And if I do get if I do get a strong wave of negativity, then okay, I'll move on. But I don't go out and try to get all kinds of permissions first. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
if
have
that's if that type of thing is required, then okay, I won't do it.
Fair. Totally fair.
absolutely.
I have a couple of more questions, hard questions, if we want to call it like that. And
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, now that we've been talking about the digital age, we've been talking about the advent of the internet, accessibility, people that can get on platforms and have the same access as somebody else kilometers away from them. What do you think is the impact that AI might have on photography in general, but also on street photography in particular?
Wow, I don't know. I'm kind of wondering
Yes.
myself. I mean, it's really going to change things, I think, and maybe it already is. I think for the most part, it's as it gets even better and better, you're not going to be able to tell. I
Mm.
don't think, um, and I don't know what that's going to mean. I mean, we've already got so much disinformation and misinformation floating out there, and untruths. It's just gonna, I get, I don't have that many more years, so maybe I worry about it more for my kids and grandkids, how they're going to deal with it. I mean, they're growing up. They're going to be, especially my grandkids, are going to be growing up right in the midst of it. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to, try to influence them as much as I can. But they're in this world, and they're growing up in it, and I don't know what's going to happen. Honestly,
For sure.
I
In fact,
I
my
can't
next
answer that.
In fact, my next question would have been, what do you think the future of photography would be? How do you
Oh,
see the
wow.
future of photography?
Well, it's going to be just, bifurcated, I guess. There's going to be the people that hang on to the analog ways of doing things, and probably even more so, that people are going to just, on the AI end, are going to be just so turned off by that they're going to go back, they're going to continue with the old processes, keep them alive. And maybe I even will. Maybe have to go back to shooting film. uh,
Fair.
of course, with the wrinkle with that is that most people that still shoot film present it in a digital format. I mean, they'll process their films, but then they scan it and then put it out there on the internet as a digital form. So I suppose you could, if you shot film, you could still doctor it. But yeah, I don't. It's going to be crazy. Or it already is crazy. But I just
Exactly.
think everybody's going to go off into their own little, uh, tunnel, I guess, or silo.
Okay. Okay, cool. So, Don, we're done with the boring, if you want to say, questions. I wanna start before we do in the fun part,
Yeah.
the unfiltered part. I want to show you some of the photos with Marcus selected for the exhibition as well,
Hmm.
and I want to talk a little bit about
Okay.
them. So, if you have any anecdotes, if you have anything you want to say in particular in this picture, let me know if you can see the photograph
Yep, I
because
can
you're
see
just
it.
amazing. And we
Yep.
want to start with this one, with hot pants.
Okay. So this was 1980, and this was during the time that the Republicans came to Detroit to have their convention, their political convention. So this
Mm.
was a hot pants contest. So this was one of the events that was put on to basically entertain the Republicans that came to town in Detroit. And this is kind of like backstage at that event. I don't know. I don't know what that guy in the old police officer uniform was about. But um, the interesting thing, I mean, for, style or form wise, one of the things I've always liked about this is the smiling woman in the
Yeah.
center. The her painted eyelids form a nice straight line with the mortar of the wall behind her, and then the
Yeah.
mortar going up. So it's a nice cross element that I always liked about this particular picture.
So it was an event
Yes, it
to
was an event in downtown Detroit.
so they
You
called these
know,
women out for the Republican events.
yes,
What
I
was
mean it
the
was put on.
ah
I'm not sure if the city of Detroit put on this event or who was the actual originator of the
okay.
event itself, but it was basically something that was put on for all the people that came to town for the convention. And it was
Okay.
just,
Okay.
in a public square in downtown Detroit.
So like a
And this,
hot
like I say,
pants
this is the
rumble?
backstage. This is the backstage part. There was those steps
Mm.
led up to the actual stage. Uh, so
Okay. Cool. Next one.
We love this one.
Yes.
yeah. So this is one that I don't know too many of the details about. It's taken in Ann Arbor on the University of Michigan campus, and it was I don't know if it was like a street theater kind of a thing. There was some, I have frames before and after this that have people in it, and somebody was attending to things. So I don't know why it was, you know, why it was there. It was just some kind of a spontaneous kind of a street theater type of a thing. But
Yeah.
there are photographs that I've taken for, this is 51 years ago, so it's hard to. I mean, I guess in a lot of these things, I wish I had taken better notes about different things that happened back then.
Yeah,
But
and for me, one thing that really stood out is the isolation of it all. You have this
hmm
television in the middle of a campus or something, and no people like that, like in the
right.
immediate
Well,
vicinity.
like I said, in the frames before and after, there
Exactly.
was a people, and there was a dog in one of the frames that walked it in front.
So
So,
yeah, it's crazy how photos can look like. Next one,
mhm.
I love this one as well.
Another
Yep.
favorite.
Yeah.
So this is in a little town called Milan, Michigan, which is about 20 miles south of Ann Arbor, and this is at the Milan drag strip. And
Yeah.
so this, that's where it was. And this is another one of those things where access wise, to go back to Milan Dragway still is in business, still puts on events, but I would never have this kind of an access, I think, these days. But it turns out later that I found out about this guy, the one-legged guy, was kind of a Midwest famous drag racer. He
Mm.
lost his leg in like this photograph of mine was taken in 1978, but I think it was 1968 he lost his leg in an automobile accident, not related to racing, but he
Yeah.
continued. He had this car was set up with a handbrake system, so he was still that. In fact, that right above, that's his wife too, in the with the it's kneeling down by him. They
Yeah.
were a husband and wife team that raced, uh, and Cash was his name. The name on the car on the front fender right above her head that's his
It's
name, Tom Cash.
Tom Cash.
So
Yeah.
I found out all this later. This was like just a few years ago, really, that
The
he was
power of photography.
kind of a famous guy. And the other interesting thing about him is that he was also a photographer. He
Yeah.
photographed at these mainly Midwest drag strips and published them in like the drag racing magazines. So I just thought that's kind of cool that he was a
Cool.
photographer too.
It's such
Mhm.
an interesting story, and the power of photography is truly visible. You know, you discover
Right.
this
But
later on.
at the at the time I made it, I knew nothing of that. I just thought,
Exactly.
oh wow, this is an interesting shot.
And then just shot it. Yeah. Cool. I'll let you talk first, and then I'll say my
Well,
questions.
okay, so this is at the Michigan State Fair, which at that
Yeah.
time took place in Detroit, kind of on the outskirts of Detroit, in the fairgrounds. And this was also the same. I think it was the same event that this is 1980 that Ronald Reagan, who was running for president, came to. So I have shot of him a couple shots of him at this event too, but.
Oh,
This was just, I don't know. I mean, the display of these weapons, and I just thought it was interesting that also that's another kind of an ongoing theme I've had is photographing other photographers photographing.
yeah,
And
that's
so,
true.
this, father, I assume, was photographing his son hefting this weapon.
Yeah.
And, that's just one of those, bizarre things. kind, I, kind of, I guess you might say typical of American culture, gun culture.
Yes, that's
Kind of.
exactly where I wanted to go.
You probably wouldn't see this kind of stuff too much in Italy, would you?
Oh
Oh no.
no. Oh, I think you would be arrested if something like that was
Yeah,
happening.
right.
Something.
Yeah.
But
Either that or prop guns.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, Don, thank you so
Okay.
much, and
All
talk to
right.
you soon.
Thank
Okay.
you, Don.
Bye-bye.